The lie hit his face like liquid fire. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the air split with the scream I had waited 20 years to hear. It was a raw, animal sound, not the smooth voice that had ordered whippings and sales and experiments. It came from the deepest place inside him, the place he had never shown in all his years of watching others suffer. I watched the clear liquid run down his pale cheeks, turning the tender skin angry and red, then blistered and white. I had seen what lye did to wood and cloth. I had watched it eat through scraps of leather in the soap shed. But watching it work on his eyes was different. His hands flew up, clawing at his face, smearing the burning liquid deeper into his sockets. "My eyes!" he screamed. "My eyes!" He toppled backward in his chair, knocking over his cup of coffee, sending his precious leather-bound journal sliding across the veranda boards. For once, he wasn't watching anything. For once, he wasn't taking notes, wasn't recording, wasn't measuring the shape of someone else's pain. He was inside it, drowned in it. I stood in front of him, my apron still damp where I had hidden the small jar of lye. My heart was beating hard, but my hands were steady. For 20 years, he had watched me, watched the lines deepen in my face, watched the scars form on my back, watched my hope bend, crack, and bend again. Now it was my turn. "Now you cannot watch anymore," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, almost gentle, like words spoken over a grave. His screams rose higher as he rolled on the veranda boards, his long limbs thrashing, his boots hitting the rail. His pale blue eyes had always been his pride. They had stared down overseers and merchants, judges and neighbors. They had reduced strong men to silence and made mothers collapse when he watched their children being taken away. Those eyes had never trembled. Now they were dissolving. You, he gasped, trying to form my name, his hands pressed uselessly against his face. "Phoebe," I said. Subject P. "Do you remember?" The sun was bright that October noon, hot on my neck, hot on his white linen suit. The veranda looked just as it always did during the harvest inspection. The polished rail, the rocking chair, the little table with the ink bottle and the open journal. The big house behind us, painted a proud white that never knew the blood it rested on. The cotton fields spread out in front like a sea of suffering. Everything was the same. And yet nothing would ever be the same again. For years I had imagined this moment. Sometimes I pictured a knife slid between his ribs. Sometimes I saw him hanging from his own balcony, the way I had seen slaves hang from trees. Sometimes I dreamed a simple bullet to the head, but none of those images satisfied me. They were too quick, too clean. Death would have stolen from him what he loved the most. Not life, but watching life. He did not love the work of the fields. He did not love the money from the cotton. What he loved was seeing, recording, measuring our suffering like a man tasting fine wine. Lie was the only thing that made sense. It did not just hurt. It took away sight. It took away his favorite toy. People were shouting now. I heard feet pounding on the wooden floor inside the house. The cook screaming. One of the house girls crying out, "Lord have mercy." Someone called for the overseer. Someone yelled for Mistress Davenport. Dogs started barking in the yard. But for a moment, all that sound felt far away. It was just me and him, the watcher and the watched, swapping places at last. He tried to crawl away, but he had no direction now. His hands pawed at the boards, smearing blood and lye together. He rolled onto his side, then his back, his face turned blindly toward the bright sky he could no longer see. His hat had fallen off. His hair, usually combed neat, stuck to his forehead with sweat and tears and the liquid that was eating his eyes. "Please," he gasped. "Water. Help. I can't see." I remembered the times I had begged for water under the sun, and he had watched me in silence, writing down how my lips cracked and how my knees buckled. I remembered him noting my interesting facial contractions, when the lash bit into my back. I remembered him watching while a mother's child was taken away, his hand calmly moving across the page while she screamed. "Now you know what it feels like," I told him softly. "To be helpless while someone watches." My words were not loud, but he heard them. His ruined face turned toward my voice, eyes already clouding with a sick, milky film. He reached for me, fingers grabbing at the air. For the first time in 20 years, I did not step back. I did not lower my gaze. I did not flinch. I simply observed him. House slaves burst onto the veranda. One of the young men fell to his knees beside Davenport, reaching for his hands. Another ran for water. I heard the overseer shouting, ordering everyone back, trying to pull Davenport's fingers away from his face. "Miss Phoebe, what did you do?" a girl whispered, staring at me, shock wide in her eyes. I did not answer her. My gaze was fixed on him. Mistress Davenport appeared at the veranda door, her dress rustling, her face white as flour. She had always moved quietly, her presence like a shadow behind her husband's towering figure. Now she was alone at the threshold, staring at the scene on her porch. The great master rolling and screaming like an animal, the slaves hovering in a circle, and me standing tall with my hands at my sides. "What happened?" she cried. "What happened to him?" All eyes turned to me. For years I had been something half invisible, seen only as a body that could work, a back that could carry, a face that could break. Now I felt every gaze on me, heavy and sharp. "Gave him what he deserved," I said. My voice stayed steady. "He watched us suffer for 20 years. Now he can feel it himself." There was a sharp intake of breath from someone behind me. The overseer swore under his breath. Mistress Davenport stared at me as if she had never truly seen me before. The man on the floor, the one who had given orders to everyone on this land, continued to scream, his hands a bloody blur at his face. "Seize her!" the overseer shouted at last. "Grab her, before she runs." I did not move. I did not try to run. Where would I go? The fields stretched out beyond the veranda, the woods beyond that, and then more land, more white men with guns and laws. I had never planned to escape his land. I had only planned to escape his eyes. 2 men grabbed my arms, one on each side. Their hands were rough, but they were shaking. They pulled me back from the veranda rail. I went willingly, my steps slow and calm as they dragged me toward the steps. I kept my head turned, watching him as long as I could. Our eyes met for one last moment, his already ruined, mine still clear. He could no longer see me, but he heard my breath, felt my presence, knew I was there. It was enough. As they hauled me down the steps and toward the plantation jail, I heard his voice tearing through the air. "My eyes, I can't see. Somebody help me, I can't see." All those years, he had written about our pain like it was a lesson, a study, a neat entry in a book. Now his suffering had no ink, no clean lines, no calm tone. It was raw and ugly and loud. There was no distance between him and it. For 20 years, I had been his favorite subject. Today, he had become mine. I did not know yet what they would do to me. I expected the whip. I expected the rope. I expected the shot at dawn. I had made peace with that the moment I lifted the jar and stepped onto the veranda. Death was not what I feared. I had already died, piece by piece, every time he watched me break and wrote it down like a recipe. What I feared most had already been taken from him. His power to watch, to record, to turn human suffering into entertainment. Whatever happened next, that part was done. Finished. As the jail door clanged shut behind me and darkness wrapped around my body, I felt something inside me I had not felt in 20 years. It was not joy. It was not safety. It was a deep, solid stillness. A sense that a long, cruel chapter had been ripped from the book and slammed closed. He had thought he was the watcher, and I the watched. But on that veranda, under the brutal October sun, I had proven something he never wrote in his journal. The watched can watch back. And once they decide to, nothing in this world can stop them. When I was born, the Davenport plantation had already been standing for half a century. The land stretched over 1,000 acres of Carolina soil, and every inch of it had been worked, bled on, and buried by people who looked like me. My earliest memories were of dust and heat so thick it filled your mouth when you breathed. I remember the sound of insects and chains, the smell of sweat and iron, and the voice of my mother whispering my name only when no one else could hear. They called me Phoebe. It was the only thing that was mine. Everything else, my body, my time, my breath, my labor belonged to the man who owned the soil. By the time I turned 20, that man was Master Silas Davenport, newly inherited from his father. Young, thin, sharp-featured, with pale blue eyes that seemed to slice through whatever they looked at. Those eyes never softened. They didn't blink the way most men's did. They watched with purpose, with curiosity, the way one watches a caged animal to see how long it will fight before it gives up. He arrived from Charleston wearing a white suit and gloves so clean they looked carved from marble. We stood in a line, dozens of us, field hands, house servants, children, clinging to mother's skirts. He didn't speak at first. He only watched. His gaze slid over every face, measuring, calculating. I remember thinking how still he was, how quiet. His silence was more dangerous than shouting. Shouting meant anger. Silence meant thought. That evening, the overseer told us, "He likes to watch. Best thing you can do is keep your head down and give him nothing to see. But you can't stop a man like Davenport from seeing." It was his favorite form of power. Over the years, I learned the pattern of his days. At dawn, before the horn sounded, he would take his coffee to the veranda overlooking the fields. He'd settle into his chair with a leather-bound book on his lap. A silver pen rested in his hand, its nib always clean, its ink never spilled. From that perch, he could see everything: the lines of slaves bending under cotton sacks, the overseers shouting, the women cooking by the sheds, the children gathering fallen bowls. His eyes missed nothing, and when he watched, he wrote. I saw that book for the first time when I was 22. I had been brought into the big house to help clean his study. He was away in Charleston, and the mistress, his wife, a quiet woman named Eleanor, had ordered me to dust the shelves. The study smelled of tobacco and ink. On the desk lay a journal, open to a page filled with small, neat handwriting. The title at the top read, "Observations on Human Response to Fatigue and Punishment." At first, I thought it was some kind of scientific paper, but as my eyes followed the lines, I saw names: Joshua, Sarah, Moses, and then mine, Subject P. The words made my stomach tighten. Subject P denied water for 48 hours under extreme heat conditions. Observed facial contractions consistent with acute dehydration. Progression from defiance to despair to resignation. Most illuminating. That was me. I remembered that week. How I'd collapsed by the fence. How the overseer had forced me back to my feet with the tip of his whip. I remembered glancing toward the veranda and seeing Master Davenport watching, pen in hand. I hadn't known then that he was writing it down, cataloging my pain like a scientist noting the behavior of a specimen. That day changed something in me. Until then, I'd believed cruelty was a kind of storm, violent, random, without reason. But reading his words showed me it was colder than that. It was planned, measured, a deliberate experiment in how far a person could bend before breaking. His journal grew thicker with time. Every few months, he began a new volume, each labeled by year. When I passed his study while cleaning, I would see them lined up on the shelf. Volume I, 1,838. Volume 2, 1,839, and so on. 20 years of observation. 20 years of data on human suffering. The others feared him, of course, but I think they never truly understood what he was doing. Most masters beat their slaves in anger or punishment. Davenport did it out of curiosity. He wanted to see what the body and spirit did when pushed beyond hope. He called it understanding human nature. He had his favorites. The field hand, Joshua, who once stole food for his sick child, was one. Davenport recorded every stroke of Joshua's whipping: defiance at 15 lashes, collapse at 25, death at 40. Wife displayed secondary trauma response, sobbing and shaking valuable data. Then there was Sarah, a young mother who was forced to watch her baby taken away. Davenport wrote, "Subject's eyes show moment of hope extinction, useful for identifying exact point of psychological surrender." He never called us people, always subjects, always data points. By 1845, I was his primary focus. Subject P appeared more often than any other name in his pages. Sometimes I caught him watching me from behind the shutters of his study, eyes glittering like a predator's in the dark. I would keep working, pretending I didn't see, because looking back might have cost me a beating. But inside, something was boiling, slow, invisible, dangerous. He began inventing small torments. One summer he ordered that my cotton sack be filled with stones as an efficiency test. When I fell behind, he noted my predictable decline in productivity. Another time he had me flogged, not for any rule broken, but to measure emotional recovery after punishment unrelated to behavior. Each cruelty was a chapter in his experiment, and I, unwillingly, was his masterpiece. The other slaves pitied me, but they also kept their distance. Being Davenport's favorite subject meant proximity to danger. Some whispered that I was cursed, that he had chosen me because I had looked him in the eye once too often. Maybe that was true. I had looked at him, years ago, when he'd first arrived, just for a second, before I learned what it meant. That second had sealed my fate. 20 years. That's how long I endured being his subject. 20 years of sun and lashes and hunger and humiliation. But worse than all of it was the gaze. I could feel it, even when I couldn't see him. I would be working in the field, sweat dripping into my eyes, and I'd just know that he was watching from somewhere, writing down the angle of my back or the curve of my expression when I stumbled. He trained us all to live under observation. Even the overseers feared his eyes. If he saw them rest too long or raise a hand without reason, he would note it, question it later, remind them that even they were being watched. His control came not from the whip, but from the gaze. It was everywhere. And yet, for all his control, his curiosity was growing darker. As the years passed, he stopped pretending his journals were for study. His notes turned personal, indulgent. He described the beauty of tears on dirty skin, the purity of fear in a child's cry. He was no longer a man collecting data, he was a man feeding an addiction. It was in 1856, the year before the lie, that I learned what he planned next. One evening, I was sent to clean his study again. He was out riding, and the window was open to the sound of crickets. On his desk lay a fresh entry, written just days before. Young subjects exhibit more expressive emotional responses than adults. Recommend increased focus on children under 12 for optimal observation data. My hands shook. Children. He wanted to turn them into experiments the same way he had turned me into one. My stomach turned cold. That night, as I walked back to my cabin, I could still hear the children laughing outside, playing with bits of cotton fluff as if it were snow. I looked at them and thought, he's coming for you next. That was when the idea began. Not revenge, not at first, just the thought of ending him before he could touch them. But killing a white man was suicide, and killing a master was worse. There had to be a way to take everything from him without a single lash laid on my back. The answer came from a small, harmless thing: soap. Aunt Sarah, the old woman who ran the soap shed, taught me how to make lye water from ashes and rain. "Be careful," she'd warned. "You get this in your eyes, you'll never see again." The words hit me like a spark. I looked down into that cloudy liquid and saw my future. For months, I planned quietly. I collected small amounts, testing, learning. I buried a jar beneath my floorboard. Every night, I dreamed of his pale blue eyes turning blind and useless. Every morning, I smiled and worked and kept my secret. On the surface, life went on as always, fields, lashes, silence, but underneath, something in me was already free. And so, by the time the harvest inspection came in October of 1857, I was ready. He thought he was beginning another day of observation. He had no idea that he was the subject now. The day I first held his journal in my hands, the world shifted. It was not the first time I had seen it, but it was the first time I touched it, the smooth leather, the weight of it, the scent of ink and sweat mixed together. I had been cleaning his study, same as always, my body moving with the numb rhythm of habit. I dusted the bookshelves, straightened the maps, and wiped the edges of his desk, careful not to smudge the quill or spill the ink bottle. The window was open, and outside, the plantation buzzed with the dull hum of labor voices low, cotton sacks dragging, overseers barking. He wasn't there. Davenport had gone to the fields that morning to oversee a new irrigation ditch. I knew I had maybe half an hour before he returned. My eyes kept flicking toward the journal lying open on the desk. Its pages were covered in his careful, curling script, black ink sharp against cream-colored paper. For years I had only seen it from afar. When he brought it to the veranda each morning, I could see the way his hand moved, steady, deliberate, elegant. Even when someone screamed, he wrote like a man painting. Every stroke controlled, no hesitation. He loved that journal more than he loved anything human. That day, something in me broke the rule I'd carried all my life. Don't touch what belongs to them. I told myself I was only going to move it to dust beneath it, but when my fingers brushed the cover, it felt warm, almost alive. I froze, and then, before I could stop myself, I flipped the page. The words stared back at me, dozens of them, each one describing a person I knew. I saw the name Joshua again, then Sarah, then old Moses, who had died of an infection years ago. Their names had been changed into letters. Subject J, Subject S, Subject M. Each entry read like a recipe for cruelty. Subject M, male, aged 60, refused to work due to broken leg, denied medical treatment, observed progression of infection, death occurred on day 12, psychological state before death, resignation. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept reading. I needed to see. I needed to know what he thought of us when he sat on that veranda and watched. Subject P showed exemplary reaction to prolonged dehydration, maintained defiant posture until collapse. Emotional response, combination of rage and despair, concluded experiment at sunset. Valuable data. I touched the edge of the page as if I could scrape the words away. My name, no, not my name. His version of me sat there like a wound that would never heal. Subject P, not Phoebe, not a woman, a person, a soul, just a subject, a thing. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling of the cabin while moonlight slipped through the cracks. My body ached from the fields, but the pain in my chest was worse. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was understanding, the kind that cuts deeper than rage. He hadn't punished us out of fury. He hadn't hurt us out of loss of control. He had planned every act, every scream, every tear. We were his project. The next morning, when I walked past the veranda, he was there again, pen in hand, cup of coffee beside him, the journal open. His eyes met mine, sharp, cold, curious. That look was worse than a whip. It was the look of a man who wanted to see how I would react, how I would move after knowing he owned every breath I took. I looked down, the way I was supposed to, but I could feel his gaze crawling over me, writing me into the page again. After that day, I began to notice things I hadn't before. How often he turned to a new page when I passed by. How his pen scratched faster when I faltered. How he would whisper to himself, "Interesting. Yes, interesting." When someone cried out in the field, it was as if the journal was alive, feeding on our pain. Then one evening, months later, I saw something that changed everything. It was late. the sun low over the fields, painting the sky the color of rust. Davenport had called several of us to the big house to witness the punishment of a boy named Jonah. He was only 12, caught taking a small piece of bread from the kitchen. Davenport stood on the veranda, his journal open, pen poised. The overseer raised the whip. I remember Jonah's eyes wide, wet, terrified, and I remember how Davenport watched them. Not the whip, not the pain, the eyes. He wanted to see the exact second when fear turned to agony. His hand moved across the page as the whip cracked. He was writing as Jonah screamed, recording, measuring, documenting pain like a scientist charting the weather. That night I realized the truth. He didn't just love seeing pain. He loved seeing the moment hope died. That was his addiction, the instant a human spirit shattered. From that day forward, I stopped praying for escape. I stopped praying for mercy. Instead, I began to watch him back. At first, it was small things. I started memorizing his routines. When he wrote, when he ate, how long he lingered on the veranda, when he turned his head to the 26 left. I noticed how carefully he protected his eyes from the sun with his hat, how he cleaned his spectacles each evening, how he touched his face when thinking. Those eyes were everything to him. They were the tool of his control. Without them, he would be nothing. That's when the idea of blindness took root. At first, I thought it was only fantasy, a cruel dream whispered by exhaustion, but it didn't go away. Every time he looked at me, the thought came back, cold and steady. I could take your eyes. Weeks passed. The thought turned into a plan. I needed something that could destroy sight without killing him too quickly. Something that would make him live long enough to feel what helplessness truly meant. The answer revealed itself in the soap shed. Aunt Sarah was showing me how to make the new batch of soap from ashes and rainwater. "Be careful, child," she said, stirring the mixture. "This lye will eat through your skin if you're not careful. You get it in your day. Eyes you'll never see again. Never see again." The words lit up my mind like lightning. That night, I could hardly breathe. I lay awake thinking of the jar in the shed, of how easy it would be to take a small amount, a few spoonfuls hidden in a flask. No one would notice. I began to collect it slowly, over weeks, pretending to clean the barrels while siphoning small amounts into glass jars. I buried the first beneath my floorboard, wrapped in cloth. All the while, he kept watching. He didn't know that his favorite subject had become a scientist of her own, studying him, learning his weaknesses, planning an experiment that would end his. The final straw came the day I found a new entry in his journal, written in his precise hand. Subject P exhibits renewed defiance despite repeated punishment. Possible test subject for long-term deprivation experiment. Will initiate in November. Something in me turned to iron. I was done being studied. That night, I opened the prior floorboard and touched the cool glass of the jar. I held it up to the moonlight. The liquid looked like water, clear, harmless, but I knew better. I had tested it on scraps of leather. It burned holes clean through. My hand didn't tremble. I had waited 20 years for a way to make him feel what it meant to be powerless. The plan formed itself quietly. The harvest inspection in October. He would be on the veranda all day, dressed in white, writing in his journal as usual. I would approach with an excuse about the soap supplies. He would lean forward to listen. He always liked when I spoke humbly. And then I would lift my hand, quick and sure, and end his reign of watching forever. I spent the following weeks rehearsing every movement, every word. I practiced lowering my voice, bowing my head, pretending submission. I made peace with death. By the time the sun rose on October 12th, 1857, I no longer felt like a slave. I felt like the hand of something greater, justice, retribution, maybe even God himself. When I walked to the fields that morning, the jar of lye hidden against my skin, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. The same clarity he must have felt when he observed me all those years, recording how I broke. Only now, the study would be reversed. He would be the subject. and I would be the one taking notes. After the idea took root, time slowed. Every sunrise felt like a step toward something both terrifying and inevitable. The jar of lye beneath my floorboard was no longer just a secret, it was a heartbeat, steady and waiting. I could almost hear it at night, humming through the wood, whispering my name in the silence. I lived those weeks as if under two suns. The first was the real one, hot, relentless, beating down on the fields. The second burned inside me, made of rage and patience, mixed in equal measure. The strange thing was, no one noticed the change. I smiled when I was supposed to smile, bowed when I was supposed to bow. I did my work quietly, efficiently. The overseer even said once that I seemed steady again, as if I'd finally accepted my place. But in truth, I was becoming something else entirely. Every day, I studied Davenport the way he had studied me. He was a creature of habit, and his routine was as predictable as the rising of the sun. At dawn, he took his coffee on the veranda, recording his morning observations. By midday, he retreated to his study to write up notes and review reports from the overseers. In the afternoon, he sometimes rode through the fields on his gray mare, stopping to correct or punish whatever caught his eye. But lately, he had begun showing signs of something I had never seen in him before: fatigue. The years of his work were beginning to weigh on him. His hair had thinned, his once perfect posture slouched. There were moments, brief and unguarded, when he rubbed at his eyes as if the act of seeing so much suffering had finally started to burn. Yet even then, he never stopped watching. He still kept that damned journal near him at all times. When he wasn't writing, he rested his hand on it like it was alive. I once overheard him tell the overseer, "This work will outlast me. People think they know human nature, but I'm documenting it. They'll thank me one day." The overseer nodded like he understood, but I could see the unease in his face. Even white men feared Davenport in their own way. I began to sense that the plantation itself felt my secret. There was a heaviness in the air, an invisible tremor that rippled through the quarters. The others didn't know what I was planning, but they felt that something was coming. Aunt Sarah, who had unknowingly given me the knowledge that became my weapon, sometimes watched me with cautious eyes. Once, she said quietly, "You've been walking lighter these days, Phoebe, like a woman who done laid her burdens down." I smiled, but I didn't answer. If she had known the truth that I carried a jar of blindness hidden in my floorboards, she might have fainted dead away. At night, when the fields were quiet and the frogs began their chorus, I would take the jar out and hold it in my hands. The liquid was clear, harmless looking, but I could see the shimmer of power in it. I tested it once more, pouring a single drop onto a scrap of leather. It hissed softly, and within minutes, the spot turned brittle, eaten through. I imagined Davenport's eyes, those blue orbs that had consumed every detail of our pain, dissolving the same way. I told myself this wasn't about hatred. Hatred was too simple, too human. This was about balance. For 20 years, the world had tilted one way, his way. I was simply correcting it. Still, there were nights when I woke sweating, unsure whether I was avenging the living or becoming as monstrous as the man I hated. Could justice and cruelty share the same face? Aunt Sarah's words echoed in my head, "Be careful, child." Not about the lie this time, but about what it was turning me into. By late September, my plan was nearly complete. The harvest inspection was approaching, the grand performance Davenport relished every year. He would sit on the veranda all morning, watching every field hand labor under his gaze. He called it assessment. The slaves called it the judgment day. In the weeks before it, the tension on the plantation grew thicker. Overseers barked louder, and even the wind felt sharp. Davenport was especially meticulous that year. He wanted perfection. He wanted to record the best data of his career. I heard him tell his wife, "After this harvest, I'll have enough to publish a full study. Imagine, Eleanor, my name in the annals of science." I remember Mistress Davenport's face as he spoke. She didn't respond. Her eyes were hollow, her lips tight. There was a time she'd looked at her husband with admiration. Now she looked at him like one looks at a corpse that hasn't realized it's dead yet. The night before the inspection, I slept little. The jar was already tucked beneath my clothes, small and warm against my stomach. I had measured the amount carefully enough to destroy his sight but not kill him outright. Death would have been too easy. I wanted him to live in darkness, to wake each morning in a world without light, where he would forever remember the faces he'd destroyed. I rose before dawn, washed my hands, and tied my hair with a strip of cloth. Outside, the fields glowed faintly under the first light. The air was heavy with the smell of dew and cotton. I could hear the murmurs of the others as they lined up for the day, their voices low and cautious. I walked among them, calm and silent. I felt no tremor in my hands. When Davenport appeared on the veranda, dressed in his white linen suit, the sight of him nearly made me tremble, not with fear, but with focus. He looked almost fragile in that light, thin and sharp, a figure carved from bone and paper. His spectacles gleamed in the sun. The leather-bound journal lay open before him, a fresh page waiting. I worked through the morning under his gaze, bending, picking, straightening, the same motions I'd done for decades. The heat rose, and the sweat ran down my spine. My eyes flicked up to the veranda every now and then, just enough to see him writing. I knew his patterns. Around noon, he would pause to stretch, take a sip of his coffee, and glance toward the soap shed to check the house supplies. That would be my moment. Each second leading up to it felt like walking along a knife's edge. The other slaves noticed something different about me that day. One woman whispered, "Phoebe, you all right? You look like you've seen the devil." I smiled faintly and said, "I'm about to." When the horn sounded to mark midday, Davenport leaned back in his chair, stretching just as I expected. His gaze swept the fields lazily, stopping on me. I could feel his attention, the weight of it. That was my invitation. I picked up the small cloth bundle I had hidden under a pile of cotton and walked toward the house, head bowed, shoulders hunched in the familiar shape of submission. My heart thudded, but my steps were steady. Each one brought me closer to him, closer to the moment I had dreamed of through years of lashes and tears. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mistress Davenport standing near the parlor window, watching her husband, her face pale and unreadable. I wondered if she sensed what was about to happen, if some silent understanding passed between the women in that house, the wife who'd endured him in silence and the slave who'd lived under his eyes. As I reached the veranda steps, I called out softly, "Master, I need to speak with you about the soap making." He looked down from his chair, frowning at my interruption. "What is it, Phoebe? Speak up." I took a slow step forward. "There's a problem. With the supplies, sir. The mix ain't right." His curiosity flickered. He loved when slaves brought him small dramas. It gave him new material to write. "A problem?" he said, leaning forward, setting his pen aside. "Explain." I moved closer, one step, then another. The jar pressed against my ribs, warm with my own heat. My hands trembled now, not from fear but from the unbearable weight of anticipation. "I thought you should see it yourself," I said, and that was the last lie I ever told him. The rest you already know, the splash, the scream, the fire that bloomed across his face. But standing there, in those final seconds before the act, I understood something vital. Revenge does not burn like hatred. It burns like clarity, like truth set free. For 20 years, he had made me his subject. In that instant, I became the experimenter. And as his voice tore through the air, I felt the world tilt back into balance. The moment the lie left my hand, time lost its rhythm. It did not pour like water, it leapt, alive, a streak of invisible lightning. I saw it strike his face before I even heard the sound. There was a hiss, almost delicate, like steam rising from a kettle. And then came the scream, ragged, guttural, torn from the core of him. The jar shattered at my feet, splashing the boards. The smell hit next, sharp, acrid, like burnt hair and ash mixed with salt. He clutched at his face, stumbling backward, knocking over the little table with his ink and papers. His precious journal flew open, pages flapping like white birds in a storm. The pen rolled toward my shoe, leaving a trail of black ink that cut across the veranda boards like blood. For years, I had watched him write. Now, I watched his eyes melt. He dropped to his knees, shrieking. The sound filled the air, spilling into the fields, rolling across the cotton rows. For the first time, his voice carried not power, not command, only pain. His white suit turned gray as he rolled. On the boards, his hands clawing at his face. I stood still, my chest rising and falling. But my hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. The world seemed to move slower, clearer. I could see every detail, the way his hat fell sideways, the glint of sunlight on the spilled coffee, the droplets of lye sizzling where they struck the railing. His blindness was spreading already. His pale blue eyes, once so precise, so calculating, were turning white and cloudy, as if a storm had passed through them. He screamed my name. No, not my name. He screamed you, like a curse that never finished. I took a step closer. Now you cannot watch anymore, I said softly. It was not triumph in my voice. It was truth. His hands trembled as he tried to find me, swinging blindly through the air. His fingertips brushed my dress, and I felt the heat of his skin, already burning from the lie. For a heartbeat, I could have ended him completely, a push, a knife, a final strike. But that was not the plan. Death was too clean. He needed to live with what he had done. I stepped back. He collapsed, moaning, half curled on the veranda boards, his body shaking. Behind me, I heard the commotion begin. Footsteps pounding on wood, shouts echoing from the house. The overseer burst through the doorway, face pale, followed by the housemaids. "Sweet Lord," someone cried. What happened? His eyes! His eyes! They surrounded him, their panic a strange music in my ears. Someone shouted for water, someone else for the doctor. Mistress Davenport appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color, clutching the frame like she needed it to stay upright. Her husband turned his blind, ruined face toward her voice. "Eleanor, I can't see. I can't see anything." My eyes, she hesitated. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across her expression, not grief, not horror, but relief, sharp and fleeting like lightning behind clouds. Then she moved forward, kneeling beside him, pressing a cloth to his face. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice trembling but not from fear. "Phoebe, what did you do?" I looked at her. "I gave him what he gave the rest of us." The words felt heavier than any chain I had ever worn. Around us, chaos swirled, servants running, someone shouting for bandages, the overseer trying to regain control. Yet through all of it, I stood motionless. There was nothing left to run from. My punishment, whatever it would be, was already written in the air. The overseer grabbed my arm roughly. "You'll hang for this, woman," he spat. I didn't resist. I let him twist my wrists behind my back, felt the rope bite into my skin. I looked past him, past the cluster of people kneeling over Davenport, and met Mistress Davenport's gaze again. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than expected, searching, measuring, maybe even understanding. Then she turned back to her husband. "Take her to the jail," she said quietly. They dragged me down the steps, across the yard. Behind me, I heard the master still screaming. The sound didn't stop as I walked away. It followed me, a jagged echo chasing through the hot air, until it faded into a low, broken moan. Inside the plantation jail, a small wooden shack with iron bars. Instead of mercy, the air was thick and sour. They threw me in without ceremony. The door slammed, the lock clicked. For the first time in decades, I was alone, completely alone. I sat on the floor, staring at the dirt. My wrists throbbed where the rope had rubbed raw, but I didn't care. My ears still rang with his cries. Every sound outside the barking dogs, the panicked voices came to me muffled, distant. As the hours passed, I began to feel the weight of what I had done settle on me like dust. I thought of Aunt Sarah, of the others in the quarters, of the children. I wondered what they were saying now. Were they terrified? Or did they whisper my name with awe, like a prayer finally answered? Evening fell. The shouts had quieted, replaced by the distant sound of a doctor's cart on the gravel road. I imagined the scene inside the house. The doctor bent over Davenport's face, Mistress Davenport watching with her hands clasped tight, the overseers pacing like nervous dogs. I knew what the doctor would say. The damage was irreversible. The eyes were gone. He would live, but the world would be darkness forever. When the night deepened, the jail grew colder. I curled up on the floor, resting my head against the wall. The moonlight slipped through the cracks, striping the dirt floor with silver. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. I felt strangely calm. If death came in the morning, I would meet it without regret. But death did not come. Instead, on the third day, footsteps approached. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside holding a lantern. The light fell on her face, pale, tired, but composed. Mistress Davenport. She dismissed the guard with a small wave. When the door shut behind her, she spoke softly. "I brought you something." In her hands was a bundle wrapped in dark cloth. She knelt and set it on the floor between us. When she unwrapped it, the breath caught in my chest. It was the journal. His journal. "I thought you should see this," she said. I stared at the book, the same one that had documented 20 years of pain. "Why?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know what you stopped," she said. She opened the journal to a page near the end, the ink still fresh. My eyes scanned the words. Proposal for extended study on child subjects ages 6 to 12 to observe psychological effects of hunger. I looked up sharply. Her expression was calm, but her eyes glistened. "He called it research," she said. "But I think you and I both know it was something else." I could only nod. My throat was too tight for words. "He's alive," she continued, "but blind. He will never see again." A silence stretched between us. "Do you hate me?" she asked suddenly. The question startled me. "Why would I?" "Because I stayed silent," she said. "Because I watched him and did nothing." I met her eyes. "You were a prisoner too," I said quietly. "Your cage was prettier, that's all." She seemed to absorb that, her shoulders softening. Then her voice changed quieter, almost conspiratorial. "They want to hang you," she said. "The overseers, the neighbors. But I have another idea." I frowned. "What idea?" "You will live," she said, "and you will take care of him, feed him, clothe him, guide him through his darkness. Let him feel what it means to depend on the one he destroyed. If there's justice in this world, perhaps that's it." I stared at her, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. "You'd make me his keeper?" "Yes," she said simply. "Either that, or you die tomorrow." The irony struck me like a blow. To serve the man I had blinded, to watch his helplessness every day. It was a punishment and a gift. Slowly, I nodded. "I'll do it." She rose, gathering the cloth around the journal. Then it settled. She paused at the door and looked back. Her face was half in shadow. "Make sure he understands what he's lost, Phoebe. Make sure he remembers." The door closed behind her. The lock clicked again. I sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of insects outside, and thought about her words. The watcher was blind. The watched would now become the witness. Justice, I realized, wasn't always loud or swift. Sometimes it whispered, patient and cruel, over the course of years, and I had all the time in the world. The morning they opened my cell, I felt lighter than air and heavier than stone. 3 days had passed since Mistress Davenport's visit. 3 days since she'd offered me a bargain that tasted like both poison and mercy. I had not slept. I had turned her words over and over in my mind, until they no longer sounded like speech, only the echo of a sentence being carried out. You will live, and you will take care of him. When the guard came, he said nothing. He unlocked the door, gestured for me to follow, and led me through the yard where the dew clung to the grass like frost. The plantation seemed quieter than ever before. Even the birds were cautious, their songs short and uncertain. The house loomed ahead, pale in the early light. I had walked those steps 1,000 times as a servant. That morning I climbed them as something else, though I did not yet know what. Mistress Davenport met me at the door. She wore black, though no one had died. Her hair was pinned tight, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She did not speak at first. She only studied me the way her husband once had, except her gaze carried no cruelty, only calculation. He's awake, she said at last. You may begin. The hallway smelled of vinegar and medicine. The house servants had scrubbed everything clean, but the odor of fear lingered. The mirrors were gone. I noticed that first, every one of them removed, as though the sight of reflection itself had become unbearable. Heavy curtains blocked the morning sun. She stopped before the master's chamber and opened the door. He knows you're coming, she murmured. He asked who would tend to him. I told him it would be you. I stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a single lamp. Davenport sat by the window, though the shutters were closed tight. His face was bandaged, but not completely. The doctor had removed the wrappings to let the wounds breathe. I saw what lay beneath the ruin I had made. Where his eyes had been were now 2 hollow sockets, the skin raw and pink at the edges. His once smooth hands trembled on his lap, stained with the faint yellow of ointment. He turned his head toward the sound of my steps. "Who's there?" he demanded. His voice cracked on the last word, thin and uncertain. "It's me," I said quietly. He went still. The air between us thickened. Then, with a laugh that was more like a cough, he said, "Of course. My wife's sense of irony remains intact. She thought it fitting," I replied. He tilted his head. "Appropriate punishment, wouldn't you say? The subject becomes the caretaker. The experiment turns inside out." I said nothing. "Come closer," he ordered. I did. He reached out blindly until his fingers brushed the fabric of my sleeve. The touch made my skin crawl. He smiled, a grim, twisted echo of the man he'd been. "I can tell by your silence that you're enjoying this," he said. "You think you've won. No one wins," I murmured. "We just live with what's left." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Describe the room to me." I hesitated. "Why?" "Because I can't see it," he said, voice rising. "I need to know. Tell me what's around me." I forced myself to obey, describing the furniture, the curtains, the lamp, even the rug beneath his chair. My words trembled at first, but as I spoke, something strange happened. I realized how completely he depended on my voice now. Each description was a thread connecting him to the world. Without me, he was blind not only in sight but in existence. That was the first moment I felt power, real power, thrum through my body. Over the next days, I learned my new duties. I dressed him, guided him through the hallways, fed him, read to him when Mistress Davenport asked. I bathed his hands, combed his thinning hair, described the weather so he could pretend the world still existed beyond the blackness in his head. It was service, yes, but it was also observation. He, too, began to study me again, though now his questions were desperate. "What do you look like when you speak?" he asked one morning. "Are you smiling when you answer me?" "Sometimes," I said. "Are you mocking me?" "No, just watching." The word unsettled him. I saw the twitch in his mouth, the tightening of his jaw. He hated being watched. He, who had spent 2 decades dissecting our pain through his gaze, could not stand the idea of unseen eyes upon him. Every day he tested the boundaries of our strange arrangement. He barked orders, then apologized in the same breath. He demanded to know where his journal was, what had become of it. "Bring it to me," he insisted. I must continue my work. I can dictate if I must. Mistress Davenport has it, I said. She said you're finished writing. He turned his ruined face toward me. No, he whispered. I am the one who observes. It's who I am. Not anymore, I said. He struck out, his hand catching my arm, weak but fast. You think blindness changes who I am? He hissed. You think I can't see what's in front of me? I can feel your hatred. I leaned closer. You feel it because you taught me how. After that, the silence between us grew sharp as glass. Days blurred into weeks. His strength returned slightly, but his mind began to fray. I watched him pace the room, his hands tracing the walls, counting steps, whispering to himself. Sometimes he called the names of slaves long dead, Joshua, Sarah, Moses, summoning ghosts of the lives he had broken. Once, I found him kneeling by the window, whispering to the air as though dictating to his invisible journal. Subject P shows no remorse, he murmured. Continues to display controlled defiance. Further observation required. I stood in the doorway, unseen yet not unseen. Observation goes both ways, I said softly. He froze, then turned his blind face toward me. What did you say? I said. I repeated, stepping forward until I could smell the sharp medicine on his skin, that I'm watching too. From then on, I began keeping notes of my own. Not on paper, there was no need for that, but in memory. I catalogued every twitch of his mouth, every moment of panic when he reached for an object and missed, every groan of frustration when he spilled food on himself. I learned the sound of his breathing when he lied, the tone of his voice when he pretended not to be afraid. Each evening, when I returned to my quarters, I whispered my observations into the dark, reciting them like scripture. Day 10. Master Davenport asked for water, accused me of serving it too warm. Day 11. He tripped on the rug, blamed the rug, then me. Day 12. He asked what color the sky was, then wept when I said blue. I found comfort in those whispered reports. For 20 years, he had written my life in his books. Now I was writing his, line by line, in the air. Sometimes I caught Mistress Davenport listening from the doorway. She never interrupted. She only nodded, once, faintly, as if approving. Weeks turned into months. The plantation changed. Without his eyes upon them, the overseers grew lazy. The slaves worked slower, spoke louder, laughed in ways they never had before. Davenport sensed it somehow. They're mocking me, he muttered. I can hear it in the wind. He was right. The world he'd built was crumbling without his surveillance. Every fiber of the plantation had been woven through his gaze. Now, stripped of it, the threads loosened, unraveling one by one. In private moments, I saw Mistress Davenport watching the collapse with cold detachment. Once she told me, he ruled by sight. Without it, he's no ruler at all. Her words planted another seed inside me. I began to realize that blindness was only the beginning of his punishment. What I truly wanted was for him to know, to feel every day, that I was seeing him the way he had once seen us. To feel the same helpless exposure that comes from being studied like an insect beneath glass. So, I made small adjustments. When he asked for his cane, I would place it an inch farther away. When he reached for his food, I would move the plate slightly to the side. When he requested a drink, I brought it too hot, too cold, never right. Tiny, invisible cruelties so subtle they might have been accidents. He grew paranoid. You're doing this on purpose, he accused. Doing what, sir? I would ask innocently. He'd clench his jaw. You know what. But he could never prove it. For the first time in his life, uncertainty became his constant companion. The master who had once documented every emotion, every twitch of another's suffering, now lived trapped inside his own confusion. I could almost taste the fear radiating from him, bitter and thick. It was then I understood something profound. Observation was power, not because it revealed truth, but because it created it. Whoever watches decides what is real. And now, I was the watcher. Each day I guided him through darkness. Each night I recorded his descent in the theater of my mind. Justice, I learned, is not a moment. It is a long, slow watching, and I had become very good at watching. By the time winter came, Master Davenport had begun talking to ghosts. It started small, murmured names in the darkness. Half-finished sentences meant for people who no longer lived. I would hear him in his chamber late at night, whispering to empty air. Joshua, report your progress. Sarah, stop crying. Subject P, return to your post. Sometimes I'd enter to find him sitting upright in bed. His ruined eyes turned toward the corner as though something invisible stood there. His hands would move in small, precise motions, writing. Always, writing on invisible paper. At first I thought it was fever, but then I realized it was memory, the ghosts of all those he had studied returning, demanding his attention. The observer was being observed by his own dead. I should have pitied him, but I didn't. Every morning I found new evidence of his unraveling. He began insisting the house slaves were plotting against him. He accused the overseer of falsifying harvest numbers, of allowing the subjects to disobey. He ordered me to keep notes of every conversation I overheard in the quarters. They think I can't see, he muttered one afternoon as I fed him soup. But I know. I can sense it. They whisper about me. They move slower now, don't they? They move the same as always, I said. He slammed his fist on the table, spilling the bowl. Don't lie to me, he barked. You think blindness makes me stupid. I can feel the shift in the air. He wasn't wrong. The plantation was changing, though not in the way he imagined. Without his eyes, everything loosened. The overseers had lost their edge. The slaves no longer hurried at the sound of a footstep. Laughter soft, cautious at first, had begun to drift through the day, quarters at night. Even the land seemed freer, the silence of fear lifting from the soil. The only person who couldn't feel it was him. Mistress Davenport watched it all from a distance. She came to his room rarely now, spending more time in the study she had claimed as her own. When she did visit, it was brief and businesslike. How is his condition? She would ask me, never looking directly at him. Worse, I'd reply. She'd nod. Good. It was an unspoken pact between us, her cruelty for what he'd done, my patience for what I was doing. We never spoke about the morality of it. Perhaps neither of us wanted to name it. In February, a storm rolled through the Carolina coast, and something inside him finally snapped. That evening, he insisted on being led to the veranda. I want to feel the rain, he said. His voice trembled with something like hope. I guided him through the hall, the floor creaking beneath our steps. The smell of wet earth drifted in, through the open door. When the first drops hit his face, he smiled for the first time in months. It's cool, he whispered, soft. But as the rain grew heavier, he stiffened. It sounds like, he began, and then stopped. His hands shot up, clawing at his empty eyes. No, not again. He fell to his knees on the veranda, sobbing. The water washed over him, streaking the old scars that never fully healed. I realized then what the rain reminded him of. The hiss of lie. Every drop must have felt like it was burning. He crawled toward me, his hands grasping my skirt. Phoebe, he gasped. Make it stop, please. For a moment, something in me softened. I bent down, touched his shoulder. It's only rain, I said. But he didn't hear me. He began shouting names again, Joshua, Moses, Sarah, calling them to witness his suffering. He begged for forgiveness from the people whose pain he had studied. His words tumbled out between sobs. I was only observing. I wanted to understand. I didn't mean I stepped back, letting the storm drown his words. The man who had recorded pain like a scholar was now the experiment himself, tested by a world that finally had no mercy for him. By dawn, he was feverish. I found him shivering in bed, whispering to himself. They're watching me, he said. They're all here. Yes, I said quietly. They are. From that day on, he refused to sleep without the lamp burning. He said the darkness was full of eyes. I didn't tell him that it always had been that, even when he could see. Those eyes had been there, watching from behind every lash of the whip. Weeks passed. His mind continued to crumble, but his cruelty survived in fragments, sharp and sudden. Sometimes he would lash out, striking at the air, convinced I was mocking him. Other times, he would beg me to describe the world he could no longer see. "Tell me what the fields look like," he said one morning. "Tell me what the cotton looks like in bloom." I hesitated. "It's white," I said. "Soft, like clouds that never float away." He smiled faintly, as though remembering something pleasant. Then his smile broke. "And the people? They're still here," I said. "What do they look like?" "Free," I said. He turned his ruined face toward me, frowning. "You lie." "No," I whispered. "Not yet." That evening, I found him trying to write again. He sat at his desk, a sheet of paper before him, his hand moving clumsily with a pen. The nib scraped uselessly, leaving jagged trails of ink across the page. "Subject P continues to demonstrate erratic behavior," he muttered. "Shows signs of." His voice faltered. "Of what?" I asked. He slammed the pen down. "Of dominance," he spat. "Do you enjoy this, Phoebe? Watching me like some specimen in a jar?" "Yes," I said simply. He froze. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then he laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Then the experiment is complete," he said. "You've learned from the master." His words lingered in my mind long after he fell asleep. Was he right? Had I become him? The thought haunted me. I told myself that what I did was justice, not cruelty, but sometimes, in the mirror of his madness, I saw a reflection I did not like. One night, near the end of March, I woke to the sound of movement. His door was open, and the faint lamplight flickered down the hallway. I found him standing at the top of the stairs, his face turned toward the dark below. "Master?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I took a step closer, my bare feet silent on the wood. "You shouldn't be up." He tilted his head toward my voice. "Do you believe in hell, Phoebe?" I stopped. "I've seen it," I said. "Then you know," he murmured. "It's not a place. It's a feeling. It's knowing the eyes that once looked down on, others can no longer see upward, that the world keeps turning without you." He stepped forward, one foot hanging over the stair. For a heartbeat, I thought he might throw himself down. Instead, he sank to his knees, gripping the rail. "I can hear them down there," he whispered. "All the ones I hurt. They're waiting." I knelt beside him, my hand hovering near his shoulder but not touching. "Maybe they are," I said. "But you're not done yet." His head turned sharply toward me. "Not done?" "No," I said. "You haven't suffered enough." He let out a strangled laugh. "You sound like me." "Maybe I learned from the best," I said. The next morning, I found Mistress Davenport waiting in the hall. She looked thinner, older, her face drawn tight. "He's finished," she said. "He'll never recover." I looked past her toward the closed door. "Then what happens now?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." Her voice trembled, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. "You were right," she whispered. "He was a monster. But living with a monster leaves its mark on you. On me. On this place." I wanted to tell her I understood. That monsters weren't born. They were built, one cruelty at a time, until the line between victim and perpetrator blurred into gray. But the words wouldn't come. That night, the house creaked with the weight of memory. Davenport mumbled in his sleep, calling my name, calling everyone's names. The storm outside rattled the shutters. I sat in the chair by his bed, watching him thrash and mutter. When dawn came, I leaned forward and whispered, "You're being watched, Master." His body went still. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't have a reply. By April of 1858, the plantation had become a tomb. The fields still rippled white with cotton, but the laughter had gone quiet again. The overseers moved through, their days like ghosts, uncertain who ruled now, the blind master who screamed at shadows, or the wife who spoke only in whispers. I walked the halls in silence, my bare feet making no sound against the warped boards. Even the air seemed heavy, thick with waiting. Master Davenport was dying, though he didn't yet know it. His body wasted slowly, eaten from the inside by the fever of his own mind. He had stopped eating regularly, stopped sleeping through the night. The once proud man who'd spent his mornings dictating human misery now spent his nights clutching the bedpost, gasping like a child afraid of the dark. I was the only one he still recognized. Sometimes he called me by name, other times he called me Subject P, as if the experiment still continued. But the lines of power had reversed so completely that I no longer needed to remind him who watched whom. Every breath he took was under my observation. Every movement, every sigh, every tremor of his wasted hands was a record written not in ink, but in memory. The first time he tried to kill himself was on the morning of April 12th, 6 months to the day since I'd thrown the lie. I found him in his study, kneeling beside the desk where his journal once lay, the air thick with the smell of spilled brandy and blood. He'd tried to cut his wrists with a letter opener. The blade was dull. It had only torn the skin, not deep enough to free him. When I pulled the weapon from his hands, he struggled weakly. "Let me die," he rasped. "Please, Phoebe. I can't live in this darkness." "You can," I said. "You will." I bound his wrists with a strip of linen, pressing hard enough to make him wince. "You owe the dead more than an easy death." He went still then, and for a moment, I thought he might weep. Instead, he whispered, "You've become cruel." "Cruel?" I said. "No, Master. I've become accurate." He flinched, recognizing his own words turned against him. I reported the attempt to Mistress Davenport. She sat in her husband's old chair, staring out the window toward the fields. "Take away anything sharp," she said flatly. "If he wants to die, he'll have to earn it." There was no satisfaction in her voice, only exhaustion. She had been living inside this punishment as much as he had. The house itself seemed poisoned by memory, the walls steeped in the echoes of screams and sobs. The servants spoke of hearing voices in the corridors, footsteps at night when no one walked. Some said the plantation was haunted. I thought perhaps it was only haunted by conscience. That evening, I found him sitting in the parlor, rocking slightly in his chair. The fire cast flickering shadows across his ruined face. He turned toward the sound of my steps. "Phoebe," he said softly, "do you believe in forgiveness?" "No," I said. He nodded slowly. "Neither do I." The days passed like hours, each one a repetition of decay. He refused most food, his skin turning the color of candle wax. His hands trembled constantly. When I tried to steady them, he jerked away. "Don't touch me," he hissed. "You enjoy this too much." "Maybe I do," I said. "Maybe that's what justice looks like." But when I returned to my quarters that night, I sat awake for hours, staring at the wall. His words crawled under my skin. I told myself he was manipulating me, twisting pity into guilt the way he once twisted observation into power. Yet part of me wondered whether cruelty ever truly ends once it begins, or if it simply changes direction. By May, his madness had deepened into something almost holy. He began speaking to unseen figures again, holding imaginary court with the ghosts of the enslaved. I'd hear him muttering to the empty corners of his room, "You are free now. I release you. All of you." Sometimes he would laugh high, trembling, joyous as though the ghosts were answering him. Other times, he would scream, clawing at his face, shouting that they were choking him, dragging him down into their darkness. One night, I found him crawling along the floor, his hands sweeping desperately across the boards. "My journal," he whispered. "Where is it? I can't find it. I need to finish the record." I knelt beside him. "It's gone." He froze. "Gone. Your wife took it," I said. "She gave it to me." He turned his blind face toward me. "You?" His voice cracked. "Why you?" "Because it's about me," I said. "Because you wrote me into it for 20 years. He let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Then you should burn it, he said. End it. No, I said. I'll keep it. Someone should remember what you did. He began to shake. No one should remember me, he whispered. Please, Phoebe, promise me that when I'm gone, you'll destroy it. I stood and looked down at him. You had no mercy for one memory. Why should it have mercy for you? He fell silent. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the faint creak of the rocking chair moving on its own. That night, a storm came, the kind that tears the sky open. The wind howled through the shutters. The rain lashed the windows like whips. I sat in my corner of the room, half asleep. When I heard him rise, he moved with an eerie calm, his feet bare against the boards. I followed him quietly, my heart pounding, knowing something in him had decided. He walked down the hallway, his hand grazing the wall for balance, and entered his study. He stood before the desk for a long time, breathing slow and even. Then he spoke softly, as though to someone unseen. The watcher must be watched. The record must end. When I stepped closer, I saw what he held in his trembling hands, a strip of linen twisted into a noose. No, I said, but the word was too soft. He turned toward the sound of my voice. You gave me blindness, he said. Now I'll give you silence. Before I could reach him, he looped the linen over the ceiling beam. His fingers moved deftly, almost gracefully, as though tying a ribbon. He slipped the noose around his neck and whispered something I couldn't hear. I lunged forward, but the stool tipped, and his body fell. The sound it made was quiet, just a dull thud and a soft creak as the beam took his weight. The world seemed to stop. The lamp flickered, and for a moment, I thought the whole house held its breath. Then I heard the faintest sigh escape his lips, a sound of release, not pain. I stood there for a long time, staring at the swaying body. The linen groaned, then stilled. His hands hung limp, the last tremor of life leaving them. It was over. I did not call for help, not immediately. I stood there, watching him as he had watched me for so many years. The rain outside softened into a drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed, heralding a new day neither of us would see the same way again. When at last I turned to fetch Mistress Davenport, she was already there, standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, but dry. She looked from me to the body, then back again. It's done, she said simply. I nodded. Yes. She stepped forward, reached out, and touched his dangling hand. He always said he wanted control of every outcome, she murmured. I suppose he found a way. Her tone held no grief, only fatigue. When the men cut him down, I did not look away. I watched every moment, the lowering of his body, the slackness of his limbs, the way his head fell to one side. For 20 years, he had demanded witnesses to others' pain. It felt right that someone should bear witness to his end. That night, the house was silent for the first time in my memory. No shouting, no footsteps, no scribbling of ink on paper. Just quiet. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the horizon brighten. Somewhere in the fields, the first pickers were stirring, unaware that their tormentor's reign had finally ended. The watcher was gone, but the watching would continue, because someone had to remember, and I would not forget. They buried him on a bright, ordinary morning, the kind of morning when the fields glowed soft in the early light, and the air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Nothing in the sky marked that the man going into the ground had once ruled over hundreds of lives with a pen and a pair of pale blue eyes. The birds still sang. The sun still climbed. The world, as always, moved on. They dug his grave on a small rise just beyond the main house, where the ground was dry and the view stretched over the cotton fields. It was the same land he had measured and counted and bled for profit. Now it would hold him, silent and unobserved, for the rest of time. The funeral was small. A few neighboring planters came, stiff in their black coats, their faces arranged in proper sorrow. They spoke in low tones about a troubled mind, A brilliant but misunderstood man. A tragic end. None of them mentioned the experiments, the journal, the screams that had soaked into the veranda boards. The house slaves and a handful of field hands stood at the back, heads bowed. We were there not by choice, but as part of the performance. A master's burial needed witnesses. It seemed fitting that the same eyes he had watched all his life now watched his coffin disappear into the dirt. Mistress Davenport stood at the head of the grave, veiled in black. Her hands were clasped tightly around a small handkerchief, though I never saw her raise it to her eyes. She did not cry. She did not collapse. She just stood there, rigid and still, as the coffin was lowered. The preacher spoke words about rest and forgiveness and God's mysterious ways. I listened, but the words slipped over me like water on stone. Forgiveness was a language I didn't speak. When the final clod of dirt thudded onto the coffin lid, something inside me loosened. Not joy, not triumph, just a long, slow breath I felt I'd been holding for 20 years. The watcher had gone where no eyes could follow. His gaze, which had once seemed like a law of nature, was gone from the world. But his record was not. Later that afternoon, a house girl told me the mistress wanted to see me in the study. I walked there with careful steps, my heart beating in a strange rhythm, half fear, half curiosity. I had never been summoned there in such a way before. The door was slightly open, and I pushed it with the same hand that once brushed his open journal in secret. Mistress Davenport sat behind the desk. It was the same one where he had written his entries, the same one where I had stood years ago and seen my life reduced to ink. But now, his chair held a different posture. Her posture. She looked up as I entered. There was no hatred in her gaze, no affection either, just a kind of tired clarity. "Close the door, Phoebe," she said. I did. She reached into a drawer and laid something on the desk. My breath caught when I saw it. The journal. Its leather cover was as smooth as ever, its edges worn from years of handling. It seemed almost to pulse with the weight of its contents. "This belongs to you, more than it ever did to him," she said. I stared at the book. "Why?" I managed. "Because it is full of you," she replied. "And because what he did to you and people like you. You are the one who has to decide what happens to it now." I stepped closer, my fingers hovering over the cover. I didn't touch it yet. "What do you want me to do?" she sighed, looking toward the window where you could just see the corner of his fresh grave. "Part of me wants you to burn it," she said, "to destroy every word. Perhaps then I could sleep at night." "And the other part?" I asked. "The other part," she admitted slowly, "knows that what he did shouldn't be buried with him." Silence settled between us like dust. Then she said the words that changed the course of my life. "I'm selling the plantation." I blinked. "Selling?" "Yes." Her mouth tightened. "I can't live here anymore. Not with everything I know, and everything I ignored. The land will go to men who don't care about journals or experiments. They just want cotton." I nodded slowly. That, at least, felt like truth. "What will happen to us?" I asked. Old habit. The "us" came out before I could stop it. She watched me closely. "You," she said, "have a choice." The word hit me like a blow. Choice. It was not a thing I had been offered often. "I can sell you with the others," she continued, her voice steady, "to another planter, another field, another set of eyes. Or, I can grant you your freedom," she said, "manumit you legally, give you a little money to start somewhere else, somewhere far from here." My throat closed. Freedom. I had imagined it 1,000 ways, and yet never like this, spoken calmly in the same room where my suffering was once catalogued like scientific data. "In return," she added, "you leave this place, you take that journal with you, and you do not speak of what happened here, not while I live." There it was. The price. "Silence," I said. "Silence," she agreed. I looked at the journal. I thought of Joshua's blood, Sarah's tears, Moses's untreated leg. the children he had planned to starve in the name of understanding. I thought of all the names reduced to letters. J, S, M, P. May I read it first? I asked. Her eyes softened in a way I had never seen. Yes, she said quietly. You deserve at least that much. That night, I sat in my narrow cabin with a candle burning low and the journal open on my lap. The pages flickered under the weak light, his careful handwriting marching, line after line. I read until my eyes blurred. I read about punishments I had witnessed and those I hadn't, about experiments on hunger, on cold, on separation, about lies told to mothers to measure grief, about sleep deprivation, about intentional infection, about withholding medicine to observe the full course of disease. I read the entries about me the day I collapsed in the fields, the day he told me Rebecca had been sent to a brothel, the day he watched my face when he had me whipped for no reason at all. Subject P continues to resist complete psychological submission, he wrote once. Further measures necessary. When I reached the section about the children, the planned starvation, the long-term study of developmental decline, my hands began to shake so badly the candle flame wobbled. He had seen their fear as raw data waiting to be harvested. By the time the candle burned down, my decision was clear. In the morning, I returned to the study. I'll accept your offer, I told Mistress Davenport. My freedom, the money, the journal. She exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath since her husband died. And your silence? For now, I said. While you live, I won't speak of it. She studied me. And after I'm gone? After you're gone, I replied. The truth will have to find its own way. She hesitated, then nodded. I suppose that's as much as I can hope for. 2 weeks later, papers were signed in town. I stood in a cramped office that smelled of ink and tobacco, while a clerk read the words that changed my legal status from property to person. I walked out with a folded document in my hand, a small bag of coins, and the journal wrapped in cloth. When I turned my back on the Davenport plantation, I did not look at the fields. I did not look at the veranda. I looked only at the road ahead. I traveled west, riding partway with a wagon train, walking the rest, when the money ran thin. Some nights I slept in strangers' barns, some nights under trees. The journal never left my side. I kept it wrapped, hidden, pressed to my chest at night like a second heartbeat. Eventually, I reached Texas, where distant cousins of former slaves had formed a small community of freed people on rough land. They took me in, no questions asked, as if they understood that a woman who carried that kind of silence needed time before she could speak. The years blurred into a gentler rhythm. I worked where I could, washing, cooking, mending. I watched children grow up free in a way I had never imagined. They ran without fear of a white man's gaze tracking their every motion. When I sat in the doorway in the evenings, the sun on my face, I sometimes touched the journal through the cloth and thought of all the eyes that no longer watched us. Time thinned my hair and bent my back. My hands became knotted like old roots. But my mind stayed sharp. Memory, once burden, became a kind of duty. I had seen too much to let it fade. In 1890, a group of men came to our community, teachers, preachers, and what they called historians. They were collecting the testimonies of former slaves, they said, to preserve the truth of what had happened before the war. Some folks were eager to talk. Others refused, afraid that even the past could reach forward and punish them. When they came to me, I listened. I watched their faces, the way their pens moved when someone spoke, the way their eyes tightened at certain words. For a moment, I thought of him, sitting on that veranda with his journal, writing as we cried. What will you do with these stories? I asked them. Print them, one replied. Teach with them. Make sure no one can ever say slavery was gentle. I went quiet. That night, I unwrapped the journal for the first time in years. The leather had darkened with age. The pages had yellowed, but the ink was still sharp. His neat handwriting stared up at me, unchanged except by time. The next day, I told the men there was something they needed to see. We sat at my rough wooden table while I laid the journal down between us. Their hands hovered over it like they were afraid it might burn. "This is his record," I said. 20 years of what he did, what he thought, what he believed he was allowed to do to us. They read in stunned silence, their faces tightening, paling, hardening. One of them covered his mouth. Another wiped at his eyes. "Will you let us copy this?" one asked hoarsely. "Publish parts of it? People must know." "Yes," I said, "but you must also print my words beside his. His record alone is not the truth. It's only one pair of eyes." So, I told them everything. I told them about the veranda, the journal, the experiments, the children he planned to hurt. I told them about the jar of lye, the scream, the blindness, the years I spent watching him fall apart. I told them about the offer of freedom, the price of silence, the long walk west. They wrote it all down. This time, the pen scratching on paper did not feel like a blade. It felt like stitching a torn wound being sewn shut. Years later, people brought me newspapers and pamphlets with excerpts from the journal printed alongside my testimony. They called it evidence. They called it proof of the true nature of slavery. I read the words slowly, my old eyes watering, and felt something I had never expected to feel. Vindication. His work, meant to justify his cruelty, had become the very rope that dragged his memory into daylight. The watcher's own words convicted him. As I sit here now, in the small Texas house that smells of wood and soap and coffee, I know my time is nearly done. My hands shake when I lift my cup. The nights are longer, the mornings slower. The children I once watched race barefoot in the dust now have children of their own. Sometimes they ask me, "Mama, Phoebe, are you glad you did it? Are you glad you blinded him?" I always answer the same way. "I am glad," I say, "that he never watched another child cry. Soon, I will go where he went, though not the same way. I feel no rope at my neck, no lie in my eyes, only the gentle pull of rest. I have asked for a simple stone when I'm gone. No dates, no flowery words, just one line. Phoebe," she watched back. "Because that is what I did. In a world that said I was only something to be observed, I learned to observe in return. I learned that the gaze can be a weapon, that memory can be a blade, that truth, once written and spoken, outlives the hands that tried to shape it. The watcher thought he could define us with his pen. In the end, it was our watching, our remembering that defined him. And that, more than lie or rope or grave, was the real justice."